this time. I'm going to do a very quick sort of jump. Really doesn't specify quite there, but I'm a PhD candidate in Hispanic American literature, so I'm a little bit, not completely a fish out of water, I'm sticking my head out of the water, but I want a little bit to take this opportunity and draw the connection between the importance of thinking about the future and thinking about how we can change the processes that are destroying our world at the moment, or not destroying, but are hurting or impacting our own presence in the world at the moment, how we can change and address these processes, not only by thinking of the land, but by thinking of the ecosystem as a whole, and thinking of our positions in the ecosystems in rural, but also in urban settings. I don't know, there was a lot of echo. So when my father invited me to participate with him, I sort of blanked a little bit, and I was, well, I study literature. What exactly could I say? And then I started thinking, it's really important, where I grew up in geographic, but also in cultural position has impacted me and shaped me and made me the way I am and allowed me to impact my own community and my own academic, intellectual, urban community in very specific ways, and I wanted to share that a little bit with you. I talk a lot in my research and in my work and my teaching, my constant teaching of undergraduate students at Washington University in St. Louis. I talk a lot about positionality and about thinking about the positions in which we are and about how the position in which we are within the ecosystem, within the ecological but also the social ecosystem, limits us while at the same time empowers us by realizing the connections that are positioned, by realizing the connections that surge from our own position empowers us to impact on those connections. So positionality in theoretical and practical terms has impacted me a lot. My father talked a little bit right now about homeschooling. That was, I wanted to share with you sort of the first experiences which I was exposed to at La Inmaculada, at Lives, which have shaped me and made me into the academic that I am today. And I think it's important to recognize them in order to see how the change that we strive to achieve in our world is a change that applies also to urban areas. As my father mentioned, homeschooling was my first experience of diversity in linguistic, cultural, religious, national terms. I was homeschooled using a program from the United States while living in Mexico. So I was a little bit schizophrenic when I was 5 years old, but in hindsight, it was an extremely diverse experience that pushed me, that put me in a position of valuing every kind of diversity from an ecological but also a social level. That was something that I cannot thank my mother enough. The second first experience that shaped me was the experience of, my father mentioned it right now, the rotating paddocks and the movable pasturing exposed me to the experience of nomadism, to the experience of migration, to the experience of movement, which right now academic theory and academic talk is barely sort of getting around to it and valuing the idea of nomadism in order to address the ways in which our world, our societies around the world are moving. As my father mentioned, the migration from east to west and now going from south to north. These migrations that are happening all around the world are an experience of nomadism, and we need to understand them as such and to value the positive experiences that they have. I was first exposed to that by cattle moving in paddocks, but that has stuck with me and allowed me to teach my students the importance of moving around within their communities, to the importance of moving and exposing themselves to other communities. Finally, my father also talked about the garden plot, which was my first experience of land stewardship, most importantly also my first experience of polyculture, my first experience of valuing plant diversity and valuing valuing polyculture, valuing not necessarily monoculture or the productivity based on one, but actually productivity based on multiples and on multiplying that multiplicity in a certain way. So all of this impacted me in a lot of ways. What my father also mentioned in the pictures, the charcoal and wood flooring enterprises that formed a part of lives. That was also my first experience of sustainable, environmentally positive, and the healthy use of plant resources in a symbiotic and mutually beneficial manner, which is something that has also stuck with me for a long time. The need of establishing relationships between ourselves and the land, but also among ourselves, also between ourselves as human beings, relationships that thrive on mutual benefit, that thrive on mutual benefit, that are symbiotic and not relationships of exploitation, relationships of domination, or relationships of subjugation, but rather relationships where all parties thrive and are able to grow in that way. So that was, I think, I wanted to do that sort of little overview to sort of jump in and explain how right now my life, even though I grew up at the ranch, my life did a sort of 180-degree turn between my 18 and 25 years, which is when I started moving into the field of academic literature. And now I constantly think about who am I, a little explanation of what I just gave, and what am I doing, or what can I do to help, to be able to survive into this coming, already millennium that we are, but to be able to survive into the century where we are facing all these multiple crises. When I was in college, I did college in Monterrey in North Mexico from 2006 to 2011. When I was in college, I experienced in 2009 the first wave of drug war-related violence that sort of overturned completely life in Monterrey. And there I also started seeing the usefulness and the importance of holistic thinking and of ecological thinking and of thinking of the world, thinking of ourselves as a part of the ecosystem and as our own ecosystem. Because I started seeing how the violence of the drug war is a very complex, interrelated, interconnected, and network-like issue, or multiple sets of issues that involve international, economical, political agents that all work together. I started seeing how it's impossible to tackle the problems of our coming century by isolating, by separating them, but rather the way we have to do it is by looking at the connections that already exist and working on multiple fronts at the same time. So that was also the moment when suddenly this sort of background that I had in land management and living with land suddenly became very useful to understanding urban phenomena, to understanding national issues and economic issues that at first sight did not seem to be connected at all, but were actually very connected. So now in the last sort of 2 minutes, I jumped from this anthropologist, Gregory Bateson, who has inspired my work in many ways. He, at some point, in one of his works, he talks about how there's an ecology of bad ideas, just as there is an ecology of weeds, and it is a characteristic of the system that basic error propagates itself. He uses this line of thinking to promote, from a very different angle, the visualization of our social structures, our societies as an ecosystem and as an ecology, and the importance of addressing our positions and such from an ecological perspective. I take that knowledge and I apply it also in a theoretical manner in my research, which is very boring, only in libraries. They're very isolating. But I also teach, and I also teach a young generation of students of Washington University in St. Louis. And I try to expose them to these ecosophical ideas, to expose them to an ethics that goes beyond simply thinking about human beings, to thinking about human beings in relation to land, not necessarily to nature, but to land itself, in relation to the stewardship of land and the stewardship of themselves. And these ideas of what I just mentioned of diversity in plants, also diversity in social settings, of sustainability in land management, but also in human relations and interhuman and interpersonal relationships, establishing relationships that are sustainable across time and are not exploitative, are not dominating, are not subjugating. The idea of symbiosis and of establishing relationships of mutual benefits for everybody. The idea of ever complex relations the ever complex systems of land management, which also apply to human engagement, to human, I don't want to say management, but ever complex ways of ordering our societies. It's something that I teach to my students, not only to see the way it is right now, but to see the way in which it can be in the future. And most of all, the ideas of decentralization in all aspects, of sort of thinking of ourselves not as something connected to a center, but as something that is decentralized, where we exist in sort of network way. So I wanted to share a little bit of that with you, to make the connection of how working to address the issues that we are facing in the coming century, of the food crisis, of an energy crisis, of all kinds of very material plus political and social crises that we are facing, is not only an issue of thinking about nature as something separate from human beings or urban societies, but an intrinsic part of urban societies. And I'll take the last, do I have a minute? 1 minute. I'll take the last minute to sort of ground that a little bit. I have a lot of friends, so I live in St. Louis. St. Louis has been over the past years in a lot of national news. I have friends who have graduated with me and are working right now in North St. Louis. They're working to establish and create not necessarily organic, but local food distribution networks to address the issues of food deserts in North St. Louis, which is coincidentally the same place, or rather not coincidentally, the same geographical place where there are racial and economic conflicts and economic inequalities, where also food is an intrinsic and integral part of these conflicts. And my friends I have participated in political activism with are working to address that specific issue of food, not as something isolated, but as an integral part of social inequality, of racial inequality, and of economic justice. So thank you very much for your time.